They looked at him falling downstairs every day. Every day the guy's falling downstairs. He said, it's not our president. We can't have it. I'm very careful, when I walk downstairs like I'm on stairs, like these stairs, I walk very slowly. Nobody has to set a record. Just try not to fall, because it doesn't work out well. A few of our presidents have fallen, and it became a part of their legacy. We don't want that. You walk nice and easy. You don't have to set any record. Be cool. Be cool when you walk down, but don't bop down the stairs. So one thing with Obama, I had zero respect for him as a president, but he would bop down those stairs. I've never said, da-da-da-da-da-da, bop, bop, bop. He'd go down the stairs, wouldn't hold on. I said, it's great. I don't want to do it. I guess I could do it. But eventually, bad things are going to happen, and it only takes once. But he did a lousy job as president.
Yes, folks, bopping our way. Isn't that amazing?
It's so good. I'm running up those stairs every time I get the opportunity, man. I'm showing off. My wife looks at me, she goes, wow, man, he goes up those stairs so fast.
I could bop down too. I just don't want to bop down. Showing off. Act like you've been there before, don't bop.
It's good. I love that we just have old guys as the president in this country.
Well, that's the thing, is that was at Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War's Conference of Generals, where he was, among other things, saying all generals, we can't have fat generals.
Yeah.
They all need to pass the PT sort of like 2-mile run limit.
Super smart.
And then Trump's being like, take it slow. No one's got to set a record. Like, which is all clearly things that he's been told by other people. Like, slow down, please.
I know for a fact there's no way that Hegseth is popular, particularly run among officers in the military. But I mean, what goddamn nerve does this guy have to talk like this? I mean, he's a TV boy. Like, it's one thing, like, you remember like Mad Dog Mattis, and like he was somebody who had just like tremendous respect from lots of people in the military. He had all those, quotes about, what was it? Be polite, but always have a plan to kill everybody in the room, which is like, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. No insight as to why we've seen so much violence and war crimes by this military. But this is somebody who at least people are like, this guy's a warrior. He understands things. Hegseth, it is insulting. And I'm not even like a kind of rah around the flag guy. I am insulted for those people to have to sit there and listen to this absolute moron go on about having their bodies war ready, and then Trump immediately after being like, "Can't go down the stairs too fast. You can't fall. If you fall."
And Pete Hegseth is a guy who. Well, let's just play this clip of Pete here. Here's the man of the hour himself. He had a few other things to say besides, fat generals need to do sit-ups. Here he is. I think this is a little bit more of an insidious thing he says here, because I would point out that there are thousands of rape allegations within the armed forces. It is such a joke that even like Amy Schumer she made like a female troop video game skit back like 10 years ago. And the thing was like about that troop getting raped and then trying to report that to a superior officer, and that officer telling her no. So the idea that this culture doesn't already exist in the armed forces is nasty. But here's Pete Hegseth, who has been accused, I think, credibly of rape.
We are overhauling an inspector general process, the IG, that has been weaponized, putting complainers, ideologues, and poor performers in the driver's seat. We're doing the same with the equal opportunity and military equal opportunity policies, the EO and MEO at our department. No more frivolous complaints, no more anonymous complaints, no more repeat complainants, no more smearing reputations, no more endless waiting, no more legal limbo, no more sidetracking careers, no more walking on eggshells.
pretty disgusting thing to say, and I
Yeah.
think pretty menacing. And I would also point out that the Officer of Inspector General does more than look into rape allegations. It would also be what you do looking into sort of wasteful spending and auditing and the spending that comes out of the Pentagon. You need inspectors generals, OIG, to use the the slang term that like military guys like Pete love to do. And I mean, this guy like playing. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean they've given this this child complete access to do whatever kind of weird fantasy politics that he wants to do within the military. I mean, that's like the giving back the medals to the people at Wounded Knee.
Right. And I mean, that's the other thing is the Pete Hegseth saying we need to restore the Confederate generals' names to these forts. Why? Because otherwise the people, there's a tradition here that we got to respect, and it's demoralizing if it's not named after, Pillow or whoever the fuck. What a joke. Like this guy's is a Minnesotan, and this sort of everyman thing, like you said, he's a media figure.
Yeah.
He also went to Princeton and Harvard. Like he is, and I do wonder, like I've had the Seth Harp sort of book rattling around in my head, like of how I think hollowed out and degenerate.
Did he do a tour?
Who?
Hegseth.
Hegseth? I don't think so. He should have done a tour. Instead, he called every general to him to do this thing. And some of the, I mean, first of all, there is some worrying things about him saying prepare for war, as reportedly leading Democratic staffers are trying to use the Iraq don't argue against regime change in Venezuela because that means you support Maduro tactic, which I wonder which offices that's coming out of. I wonder where Chuck's at on that. It is scary time in terms of like war. I don't want to make too much of a joke out of this gritty doing loser who is now Secretary of War, because he says like y'all should prepare for war. I'll just say I don't think we're prepared for war.
No.
I don't think, and even if we were prepared, we shouldn't do it anyway, especially with regards to Iran. So yeah, it's freaky times, but the could have been an email is the headline that Politico cites. Generals meeting, the last minute gathering features hundreds of military senior officials who swear an oath to the Constitution, attending something more akin to a campaign rally. And it is interesting, like, y'all should have some kind of sense of self-importance or respect to let this Fox News boy, who's only like the military bureaucratic career was like blowing through a budget as far as I can remember.
Yeah, I mean, he just wants to play toy soldier. It is incredible. I mean, he has the same kind of fixations as Trump. I mean, Trump as well hates non-clean shaven men. He doesn't like to look at it. He likes to see those cheeks. Likes to see those cheeks, shiny, beautiful cheeks. And Hegseth is getting rid of the what is it? You can get permission to grow a beard in the military, and he's getting rid of that. These are things that just like are terrible for morale. There's no reason for it. Nobody wants this other than Hegseth, and I guess by extension maybe Donald Trump. And you just hope that they're doing more kind of stupid symbolic stuff like that around the side than, I don't know, preparing for war. I mean, something like this, if I was a military member, would not set me in a position of having very much confidence in the leadership or the capabilities of the civilian government. So not good.
Here's just another clip of Trump basically drifting off, almost talking in his sleep. That's what the sort of
he was on one.
Here he is, and I mean, just a lunatic.
Fire department. I always put the fire department in because they're great. They're great, and I got 95% of their vote too. That helps.
They're great.
When you get 95% of their vote, you always have to mention them. But they're great, and they're brave. In our inner cities, which we're going to be talking about, because it's a big part of war now. It's a big part of war. But the firemen go up in ladders, and you have people shooting at them while they're up in ladders. I don't even know if anybody heard that, but And I said, don't talk about it much, but I think you have to. Our firemen are incredible. They're up in one of these ladders that goes way up to the sky, rescuing people, and you have animals shooting at them, shooting bullets at firemen that are way up in death territory. You fall off that ladder, it's over.
I need to know where these stories are coming from.
Well, David, did you consider Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, to be the inner city?
The inner cities, they're not like they used to be. Radical left. Yeah. It's wait, so something horrible happened in Idaho from
So some 20-year-old kid
Antifa?
that I don't believe he's Antifa. From Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, set fire to some brush, luring firefighters out there and opened fire on them.
I mean, horrendous. And
absolutely.
And the
psychotic.
firefighters are great and brave. I agree completely with Trump. But yeah, no, I mean.
And if that was done by a left winger, we would all know very much the details about it because they would have probably made a like Fox Nation movie out of it. By now.
So like, sorry, Trump, like, you and your boys, we're the ones who like the fire department. Y'all are the ones who want us to return to some privatized bullshit. We're the ones who like the public services.
Yeah, and sorry, Coeur d'Alene.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, I haven't spent much time in Idaho. My dad hunts there, but so West Raleigh, 20-year-old suspect in Idaho shooting. I don't see any major. I believe he committed suicide too. But yeah, like going on the inner cities, as if that's the type of thing is like, what did people imagine is going on in cities? The idea that a building would be burning and firefighters are trying to climb into the window with a ladder and people pull out their pistols and start shooting at them is so deranged. And he's like, well, they don't want to talk about it. It's happening. I know it's crazy. That's why you're surprised, but it's happening. And if you don't let me talk about it, it's because you're woke.
Well, I'm just glad that, the leaders of the U.S. military were there to hear about these firefighters being killed across inner cities all across the country.
Shooting them with air rifles.
Oh, man. Well, folks, we got a big one for y'all today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Peter Thiel in just a little bit. It is always a treat to have an opportunity to talk about that little gremlin who has had just an outsized influence on our society and our politics. And this Antichrist move of his recently has been, I think, probably one of the more bizarre turns in somebody who has been involved in all kinds of nonsense, from obviously Vance to Blake Masters, if you remember that back in the day.
Blake Masters was his what do you call it in college when you're like the teacher's helper or whatever? He was his TA
or
when
grad
he was
assistant,
writing when he was writing the 0 to 1 book that I mentioned.
Yeah, and then we're also going to be joined in just a little bit by Gwen Howerton, who is a really great journalist, an excellent follow on Twitter, and we're going to be talking about this horrific war on LGBTQ rights here in Texas, and a lot of the kind of facts about what's going on, but also I think one of the important points I think that we kind of highlighted in this conversation was how this is a real test for our society, both on the state level and also on the national level, for just how much horror and abuse and honestly just like tedium and inconvenience and nonsense from bigots and fanatics, but also government bureaucrats and like overreach, right? So I think that this is something that people should definitely be paying a lot of attention to for many, many reasons. And then after that, we keep the show going. Patrons already know you're on the ad-free stream. We got a treat for y'all. Matt and I are going deep into this Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates conversation.
Yeah, it's a shame you didn't ask Gwen which people's rights we should first try to jettison as ballast to try to win elections. But yeah, we get deep into Ezra's, frankly, crisis of identity for technocrats. That's what's happening right now.
Having an identity crisis and then exposing himself as a complete dullard. So you're not going to want to miss that. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get the full show and the post game. But without further ado, shall we get to some of these conversations, Matt?
Yeah, here's our conversation with Gil Duran. Oh, yeah.
Reminder, no questions today in the post game either. Sorry. But
Sorry,
we got plenty for you. You'll be rewarded.
Enjoy this with Gil. Welcome, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Lech, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, friend.
And excited to be joined today by Gil Duran. Gil is a San Francisco-based journalist who previously served as editorial page editor, the Sacramento Bee, and the San Francisco Examiner. He writes the Nerd Reich newsletter on extremist tech and politics and is working on his first book. He also has a new piece up at the Nerd Reich, and it was published over at the New Republic as well. What's up with Peter Thiel's obsession with the Antichrist? Before we get to the Antichristness of it all, Gil, for folks who may be just hearing about Peter Thiel, maybe because of this insane jag he's on, who is he and what sort of place does he play in American politics right now?
Peter Thiel is probably the most influential billionaire in American politics today, and he has influence that spans the globe as well. He was originally born in Germany, but immigrated to the United States at a young age after also spending some time in Africa. And he grew up partly in Cleveland, partly in the Bay Area, went to Stanford where he studied philosophy and law, then became, sort of a hedge fund, Wall Street type, didn't do too well at that initially, but then read a strange book called The Sovereign Individual that was published in 1997, which said in the 21st century, nation states and democracies would be overthrown with the help of something called cyber currency. So he got into his head that he wanted to help create this new digital cyber currency, and he tried to start a company that would do something along those lines. It ended up being PayPal, a company he co-founded with a guy named Elon Musk, who was on a similar trajectory. And after that, in the early 2000s, after the 9/11 attacks, he founded something called Palantir, partly with investment from In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's investment arm, went on to be one of the first investors in Facebook, which helped make him a billionaire years later when Facebook went public, and has now become this major donor and supporter to Trump and Republicans, and wields a great deal through Palantir and other means, a great deal of power in our society.
It's just really quick. He's kind of different from a lot of these other tech figures who are pretty involved in politics, right? In the sense that, he's always had an interest in politics even before he came into this money.
Definitely an interest in politics, and a very strange and incisive interest, particularly in finding systems other than democracy to rule the world.
Yeah, his forays into cultural analysis have always been way more interesting to me than, his just monopoly gamesmanship in the economy, although that's maybe more significant. But I think it's revealing to look at the first time I heard of Peter Thiel was his book 0 to 1, which maybe this is an uncharitable summary of that thesis, but basically it's find a way to do a monopoly that the government can't regulate you out of. Even before that, he was writing with David Sachs, I believe, a book called The Diversity Myth. This is before he made all of his money. So this is kind of like a return to form. He's almost basically played capitalism to try to push this sort of right-wing agenda. Would you say that's an accurate view of Peter?
Absolutely. He always had these very strange political views. What's happened is that now he's become a multi-billionaire who is in league with other multi-billionaires, and he has the power not just to doodle and write and give weird speeches, but to actually try to make his dreams come true. He's got some very strange interests, but one thing I would say about Peter Thiel, having studied his life and having spent way too much time with his thinking and his writing, is he has a way to pick out a really weird idea that within 5 to 10 years, a lot of other people have picked up that really weird idea as well. They call this in the tech world hyperstition, which is a term that comes from the accelerationist ideology. And it's the idea, kind of like manifesting in the kind of woo-woo ideology, that you can just think something up and make up a story, and then you can make that shit come true.
Particularly if you have a lot of money to invest toward that idea. I think, what's Thiel's relationship with our Vice President, J.D. Vance?
Well, J.D. Vance is mostly a creation of Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel came to Yale Law School when J.D. Vance was a student and gave one of his talks. One thing that Peter Thiel does a lot of is going around the world talking to young people, especially at elite universities. He has a sort of a recruitment mechanism by which he knows it's important to reach these people at a young age, to poison their minds with strange ideas of how the world should work, basically based on elite rule by the wealthy. And he goes to Yale Law School, gives a talk, and J.D. Vance is so impressed that he finds Peter Thiel's email address and emails him. And Thiel writes back and says, hey, if you're ever in California, come and see me. Well, flash forward a few years later, J.D. Vance is working for Peter Thiel, one of his companies, Mithril Capital. And that is where he writes his Hillbilly Elegy book, which makes him famous as this sort of moderate voice of reason out of Appalachia. And actually, the book had a blurb by Peter Thiel. And when Vance goes back to Ohio to start his own fund, it's with investment from Peter Thiel. When he decides to run for Senate, it's with a massive investment from Peter Thiel. I think it was the biggest investment ever made in a Senate race up to that date. And then when J.D. Vance wanted to become vice president, he had a big problem, which was that he had referred to Trump as America's Hitler. And it was Peter Thiel who made the peace between Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and got him on the ticket. So when you talk about J.D. Vance, you're really talking about an employee, a protege, an acolyte of Peter Thiel.
Yeah, that's horrifying. David, if you could play now the clip that sort of brought this Antichrist obsession to my attention, which is Peter on Ross Douthat. And I got to say, like, I've never been impressed by Peter's performance as a speaker. I imagine it frustrates him greatly that he's pretty much entirely inarticulate, whether it's at the Oxford or Student Union or here. And here is, I think, an incisive question from Ross Douthat about he being the guy to lead this charge against the Antichrist.
This is my very specific question for you, right? Is that you're an investor in AI. You're deeply invested in Palantir, in military technology, in technologies of surveillance, and technologies of warfare, and so on, right? And it just seems to me that when you tell me a story about the Antichrist coming to power and using the fear of technological change to sort of impose order on the world, I feel like that Antichrist would maybe be using the tools that you were building, right? Like, wouldn't the Antichrist be like, great, we're not going to have any more technological progress, but I really like what Palantir has done so far, right?
Yeah,
I mean, isn't that a concern? Wouldn't that be the irony of history would be that the man publicly worrying about the Antichrist accidentally hastens his or her arrival?
There are all these different scenarios. I obviously don't think that that's what I'm doing.
I mean, to be clear, I don't think that's that's what you're doing either. I'm just interested.
So, Gil, when did you start seeing him do this Antichrist stuff, and what's your read of it? And maybe more importantly, what's the world's reaction to it?
I first noticed it last year because I started digging more deeply into this stuff. And at first, it wasn't too interesting to me because he says a lot of strange stuff, and I hadn't really had the time to focus on that yet. But it was that interview with the New York Times that really brought it to everyone's attention. And I wrote a piece about it then because earlier in the year, actually the beginning of the year in January, Peter Thiel wrote a very strange op-ed in the Financial Times, which framed Donald Trump's reelection as an apocalyptic event in the Greek meaning of the world, a great revealing, and applied all this religious gobbledygook, scary language to Donald Trump, basically saying now the truth will be known and we should forgive, but only after there's been sort of confession. Very strange stuff. I'm really surprised, actually, that the Financial Times published that. But that got me into the way he's been increasingly framing his politics in these scary apocalyptic religious terms. And that interview with the New York Times made him a laughingstock, because there's this other part where Dowdhead asks him whether he thinks humanity should survive, and he struggles for 18 seconds. He stutters and can't give a straight answer. So that went super viral. And I think part of what Thiel's trying to do by doing this 4-part series to some degree is, now he's giving this 4-part secret Antichrist lecture in San Francisco. And I think he's got a chip on his shoulder because that went so poorly for him, and raised the question of whether the Antichrist might be someone who can't clearly state that humanity should continue to survive. And so now he's here in San Francisco giving this 4 days, 4 hours a day sequence, these secret Antichrist lectures. But what I found out was that he's actually given these secret lectures all around the world. In fact, every time you turn around, you find out there was another secret Antichrist lecture given at some university. He gave one in Austria where it was an audience of Catholic theologians, and they said, insufficient. Actually, I forget the German word, but Germans tell me that word is a lot more harsh than it seems in English, that it basically means as a student, there's no way you would fail. You completely did not grasp the assignment. And that must have been painful for him, which is why he wants to keep it secret. But apparently he's writing a book on the subject. And that's very concerning, because you usually don't see rich people talking about apocalyptic religion. Why? Because they have everything. They're blessed. They should be talking about Jesus and bounty and sharing. And, who more than a billionaire knows that there are miracles in the world, right? That you have attained such success. Apocalyptic religion is usually adopted by poorer people who feel that their only escape from this reality is for time to end, for Jesus to come back, and for them to then become billionaires in terms of being part of heaven, right? All your needs will be met, etc. So it's a very strange and dangerous thing he's doing. And that's when I decided to really zero in on it, because as part of my book, I'm focusing on Silicon Valley's new religious vibes. And Peter Thiel very much seems to be at the center of it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is Thiel as an individual is, scary, weird, unsettling. But there's a reason he's been at the top of Silicon Valley as a thought leader for so long. And what does that indicate about that entire sector of the economy, and where we're at in 2025, I think is a very different, darker place, obviously, than we were in 2010.
The most important thing to understand, I think, is that Silicon Valley is really stupid when it comes to the humanities, when it comes to philosophy, when it comes to history. They only read things that confirm their biases. And science fiction is a lot more important to them than anything else. Excuse me, actually, more important to them than anything else except fascist philosophy, Nazi philosophy, which they also read a lot of. And that's the concerning thing about Peter Thiel's Antichrist message. I went back and looked at all of his previous speeches. A lot of them are on YouTube. I worked for politicians. I wrote speeches, so I know that a lot of times you see the material developing over time. And if you go back and look at all the material, you're going to get a pretty good view. I was able to sort of organize and tease out what are all the themes that occur. And the main idea you find in Peter Thiel's Antichrist sequences is that he connects it to the work of Nazi philosopher Carl Schmitt to make an argument basically that apocalyptic framing is a very important weapon in politics. Carl Schmitt was this Nazi jurist and political theorist whose main ideas were that most of politics is just religious concepts in disguise, that the most important thing in politics is to figure out who's the friend and who's the enemy, and then to destroy that enemy in an existential battle, and that one of the ways you could do that is by declaring some kind of existential emergency that allows you to suspend the rules and suspend the Constitution and then eliminate your existential enemy. So that's pretty scary when Peter Thiel's mixing those ideas with the Antichrist. And instead of warning us away from this behavior, he seems content to pick some targets. He says Greta Thunberg might be the Antichrist, that communism was the Antichrist in the 20th century, that tech regulation might be the Antichrist. And a lot of mainstream journalists have glommed onto the idea that he says that AI regulation is the Antichrist. But that's just one of the things he says. And the much bigger idea is the way that he, in an almost heretical or blasphemous way, melds biblical scripture with Nazi philosophy to make a very strange and scary argument about using biblical ideas in an existential battle at the very moment that Trump is becoming more deeply authoritarian and talking about going to war and using the military on an enemy within.
Who's the real audience for this? I mean, I can't imagine that the audience is supposed to be like the general American population.
Thiel goes primarily for elites and influencers. So he's got some zillionaires in the room, but the other part of his audience is these young people who want to be in tech and are only there because they're hoping to have some FaceTime and pitch him on their idea. A lot of the cult of venture capital we see emerging out of San Francisco functions along these lines. These are young people who are being recruited into what is essentially fascism because they want to be in business, because they want to get funded. So they go to the party, they nod along, they adopt whatever moniker or attitude is presented to them. And I don't think a lot of these people are actually very interested in Thiel's Antichrist speeches. When you talk to people in the line outside, a lot of them are not, they're just lucky they got a ticket because they're going to meet Peter Thiel, they think, right? And the San Francisco Standard did an amazing story where they talked to a lot of people, and all of them were there to pitch stuff, right? Nobody was there because they think that Peter Thiel is a theologian. He's not a theologian, right? He is not a religious scholar or expert. He got burned by the theologians in the country of Hitler's birth. But all these little dumb kids and these brainless billionaires who don't know anything about anything are going to sit there thinking it's great. And they probably don't think it's great either. But if it's Peter Thiel doing it, they're going to sit there for it. And another thing to keep in mind about Peter Thiel is that Peter Thiel is also the guy not only who created J.D. Vance, but who popularized Curtis Yarvin, this atheistic Twitter troll who believes that democracy needs to be replaced with dictatorship. So tell me, how can Peter Thiel be both the agent of Yarvin and the agent of Christ? Something is definitely wrong with this narrative. And that's why I have seen fit to expose him and to mock him and to make it clear what he's trying to do.
Yeah, I think you've done that really well and exposed the stark terms these folks think in. And the other one that comes to mind is, and I know you talked about this with Paris Marx and other places, but Balaji Srinivasan's concept of tech Zionism, as in like the blues are the text folks. But that really is like, you know, I think you're right to point out the appeal to young folks who like 20-year-old men who might think like, well, the only way to get ahead in the world is to sell an idea to a monopolist. And that is the sort of material basis for this, I mean, antichrist tech cult that talks about Lord of the Rings all the time.
Yeah, and the strange thing is that if you look at any of these narratives, science fiction, Lord of the Rings, the Bible, the tech billionaires are obviously the villains in all of those books, right? But they have such bad comprehension of reading, or maybe it's a willful misinterpretation, that they somehow think they're the heroes, right? But the tech bros are transhumanists. Well, in the Lord of the Rings, Saruman's the one who's creating orcs, pulling them out of his factories, right? That's them creating artificial intelligence and promising us a future with no jobs and lots of killer robots. So that does seem to be one of their big problems. And I think that one thing they figured out is that you need something like religion to motivate people. You know, all politics is moral. You need a moral cause. And so they think their cause, the cause they sell, is saving the earth. Saving humanity, not the earth. They don't care about the earth. They think they're going to go to Mars, but they're the saviors of humanity. They're the only reason our species is going to survive and colonize the universe. And so they feel they have the complete moral right to do as they like. No one else's opinion matters. Regulation is a sin. And so they're trying to create these sort of religious ideas, tech Zionism, a war on the Antichrist, and the bundle of beliefs known as TESCREAL, all of which are this sort of doe-eyed belief that AI is about to save us and change everything and there will be no more problems. This is all following a very religious logic. And, this week actually is the Network State Conference in Singapore. I think it's the 3rd annual Network State Conference where all these people are going to come together to talk about this crap all day. And so it's not just something they're talking about. They're investing in it and they're trying to organize it. I don't think it'll work out, by the way. Because they have some significant problems with the actual religious right in this country who think that they're a bunch of weirdos, which they are.
Yeah, my question was going to be, how long can do you think they will hold tight to Trump/MAGA? Do you think, because I have seen on particularly Joe Rogan, who had Thiel on his show, then had Tim Dillon on, and they were sort of making fun of this Antichrist thing a little bit. Like, is Thiel burning through his welcome on some of this stuff?
He's definitely being a little too kinky for mass public consumption. And I don't think that a billionaire gay man is the right messenger for evangelical America. We don't have a problem with somebody being gay and religious, but go tell an evangelical who also believes in apocalypse and Antichrist that this guy is the chosen messenger. That's not going to work. And he has a lot of friction from Steve Bannon and others who are pushing back on some of this stuff because there is a bit of a power struggle. The tech guys have a lot of money, and that's been very helpful to Trump and to right-wing causes. They also are increasingly controlling the algorithms that control what everyone sees and believes and hears and thinks. So they need their help. At the same time, they don't want to come under the control of these tech guys, right? They've got to find a way to get their help, but also end up with Christo-fascism as opposed to tech fascism when this is all over with. So in a way, I read Thiel's effort to adopt this Christian apocalyptic framework as an awkward attempt to find common ground with the Christo-fascists who are at the base of the MAGA party. Correction, I'd like to call them anti-Christo-fascists because everything they're doing is actually against Christ. And I don't mean that in a literal sense that there's a demon, an antichrist. I grew up in the religion, but I'm not someone who's preaching about it and adhering to these things in a literal sense. But if you look at Silicon Valley, what in the world is more anti-Christian, more anti-Christ than Silicon Valley in 2025? I don't think there's anything in the world that goes more against what Christ said or did or preached. And it's not even a debate.
Yeah, I don't know if Jesus would love Bitcoin, but who knows? But folks, I can't recommend. Oh, go ahead, Gil.
Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's.
Exactly. Gil, you can read more Gil's coverage of Silicon Valley tech billionaires at thenerdreich.com and follow him on Twitter. Gil, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back, Left Reckoner. David here, and I'm thrilled to be joined by another Texan to talk about some unfortunate things that are happening in the state. We're joined by Gwen Howerton, who is a culture reporter at The Cron. Gwen, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, David, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
No, and I'll tell y'all, Gwen is a great follow on Twitter and a great reporter, so you'll definitely want to keep up with all of their work. We'll have links below. But I wanted to talk to you about this kind of assault on LGBTQ rights in Texas, and particularly really assaults on trans people in the state. Texas is not unique in this, but Texas is a major state with a massive population. And we have seen a real uptick, I think, in the past few years, few months, few days. Before we get into some of the specifics, I mean, how would you kind of categorize, this last year, this last legislative session, probably was one of the more extreme ones in recent years.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I would say extreme, but also in a way that maybe a lot of people didn't pay attention to. If you think about the Texas legislature meets every 2 years, right? And so before this session in 2023, there was the two like marquee things were banning, transition care for minors, right? That was the really big one. And then there was I believe it was K through 12 ban on like banning trans athletes from participating in school sports. But so this session, fast forward 2 years, there were a lot of smaller things that maybe didn't get as much attention as maybe they should have, or maybe as much outrage as kind of like the bigger marquee stuff did. But, you had a lot of these really extreme bills. You had a bill that enshrined these really strict definitions of sex into state law. You had a bathroom bill that passed in the second special session. There were a lot of little things that I think flew under the radar, but are very, very extreme and definitely going to be very harmful for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think you're right to note that a lot of people weren't really keeping up with this. I mean, this goes into something that I think has been kind of unfortunate in Texas politics and national politics. There's issues that do matter to people and affect people tremendously. Like you think about abortion as well. There's almost like this kind of acceptance that just like, bad things, it's Texas, and bad things will happen.
Yeah.
Could we get into some of the specifics here about, what was sort of pushed through, and then maybe some of the changes in the climate too, because there's stuff outside of just like what has been passed by law, but what we're seeing kind of by employers in the state as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's a lot happening on that second front, like as we speak. But yeah, like legislatively, at the top of it, you have this bathroom bill that passed that, it restricts the types of public facilities that trans people can use. So that's everything from courthouses, the DMV, like your local city government buildings, things like that are affected. And they use this really novel legal mechanism that I think is important to mention. You see a lot of big numbers thrown around, but basically what it does is it allows the state to fine these institutions that do not have laws or do not have facilities guidelines in place to police trans people in public bathrooms, right? And
what would those even be, really?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Nobody can really answer it. During legislative debate, all these Democrats were like, well, how are you going to actually figure out who is in the right bathroom under this law? And it was like, well, as you always hear, it's like, well, it's a no, I know it when I see it type of situation, right? And so, I don't
mean to interrupt you here, but like this is one of the things about these that is so ridiculous. On top of like what it is that they're trying to do, I mean, this just encourages some of the worst antisocial, dangerous, and violent behavior for people, right? Because how do you enforce something like this? Is such a it's one of these things that. This obviously this isn't about keeping anybody safe. This is about harassing people and harming folks. And just by its very nature, it makes it so that everybody is constantly in a state of potential conflict with kind of self-appointed vigilantes and sheriffs.
Yeah, it's a very I've seen some people refer to it as snitch culture almost. You saw this a few years ago with the abortion bounty bill. It is all of these laws basically incentivize people to watch and police others. And yeah, like you said, really bring out like the worst in a lot of people. It incentivizes people to complain to the Attorney General's office. There was a ordinance passed in Odessa last year that I think like it allowed ordinary citizens to sue like a trans person in, again, the wrong bathroom, quote unquote, and entitled them to damages. And so, yeah, like this pattern that you see of empowering people to kind of police and take vigilante action on other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the kind of climate stuff. I mean, at the university level, basically, we've seen a kind of full-on assault on people's free speech rights in general. We had Tom Alter on the program last week or 2 weeks ago. who's now been reinstated, by the way, folks, at Texas State. But, you know, we're also seeing, you know, these university systems really cracking down on professors and on students.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the big one that everybody, you know, you probably saw was Angelo State, which is part of the Texas Tech University system in San Angelo. You know, they instituted a complete blanket ban on discussions of trans identity. I have a couple sources that I'm still talking to at those schools. This was a policy that came out, I believe, on a Thursday or Friday. And then on Monday, they had to kind of pull all these faculty members into these meetings to explain. I got audio of this. I believe the Texas Tribune did as well. And you basically have all these professors saying, like, well, am I allowed to teach Shakespeare now? Because, you know, Shakespeare productions have men playing women, you know, like, am I allowed to teach about the gay rights movement? You know, and they keep having to walk it back. Now, some professors are saying that they're allowed to teach LGB content, but nothing about gender identity. Then Texas Tech came out on Thursday or Friday of last week and said that that was a policy that was completely university system wide. Of course, this comes in response to, you know, the firing of a professor at Texas A&M, my alma mater, right? And it continues to just this very, very broad policing and crackdown of free speech at universities. And it really goes down to like expressions of LGBTQ identity.
Where do you think that this is headed?
I mean, besides nowhere good, you know, I would say that it really is this kind of broad project when you look at all of the interlocking parts to police LGBTQ people like out of life, to completely push them out of public life. And of course, as we know, like those things don't work. It's been tried over and over, but, you know, from the state legislative level of like legislating these very strict definitions of sex into law, to the university level, making it so that you can't teach about trans people in a civil rights class, as one example I was given by a professor. It is this extreme mandate that comes down from the federal government to kind of at every level of government and institution to push LGBTQ people and especially trans people out of public life, I think.
No, I mean, I think that the speed at which this has been moving is something that's very worrying. And, you know, I wanted to kind of just between, you know, yourself and myself as two Texans, I mean, really talk about, you know, you brought up this snitch culture and this kind of just like general culture of like harassment, suspicion. It's very un-Texan to me. Like, look, Texas has never been like, you know, a perfect like utopia on these kind of issues. But, you know, I'm from Austin. You know, Austin has always been a very safe place for queer people. It's one of the reasons I love this city so much. And it's been really worrying to see how quickly that has been rolling back. And, you know, maybe if you could just sort of talk about like maybe the positive side, you know, in Texas and what it is that they're trying to, you know, rip apart and rip away from people.
Yeah, I think Austin is a great example. You know, I live in Houston. Houston has a huge queer community. It's a very like queer supportive city. You know, and I think like
sorry, just really quick, and like historically so too, by the way, because when people hear us talk about these towns, they think, oh, you know, all these liberals started moving here in the 2010s or whatever. No, these are historical communities.
Oh, no, extremely historical, right? I mean, Houston has had all sorts of queer like history and activism going back to the 70s and even before that. Austin, the same. But, you know, and that's, I think, really what they, you know, I hate to say they, but like these Republican lawmakers and legislators really do not like. It is, I think, a lot about how kind of you hear, you know, these people in charge now talk about like what they say is are real Texans, right? They talk about, you hear Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott and all these people talking about like real Texas values. And there was a study that came out not that long ago from the Williams Institute at UCLA. And they said, I believe Texas has the second or third largest LGBTQ population in the nation, right? Like there's so many same-sex couples here, so many trans people that live here. And I think it is really this desire not just at the LGBTQ level, but at every level, to kind of strip Texas of this diversity that really makes it, I think, one of the most dynamic places in the country. You know, I'm from here, so I'm biased, right? But like, you know, Houston, Austin, Dallas, obviously, but also like all these communities across the state are just so diverse in every single way. And I think our leaders don't like that in a lot of ways. And I think they try their very best to police that in a lot of ways and kind of reverse that and make it not so.
So why do you think that has become such an obsession of the Republican Party over the past few years? Is it just that they're in a position now where they feel like they're untouchable and they're trying to go through their wish lists? Or
I think that part of it is that, you know, I think it is that, I know we hate the word distraction and a lot of people hate it, but I do think it is, I see a lot of it as jingling keys, right? Like you have at the federal level, you have a president who's really unpopular. But this is a thing that they think that they can continue to just like trot out until it doesn't work anymore. I think they did the same thing with gay rights. And I think that you can kind of, you know, the two are parallels for a lot of reasons. But also, I think at a broader level, it is a part of this kind of plan and project to, you know, police people's autonomy, police people's self-expression. You know, I think that a lot of the same tactics that you see when they talk about trans healthcare, you see with abortion, and now you see with autism, right? Like the same kind of playbook is being rolled out over and over to kind of create and engineer this ideal society that, you know, I don't think it's going to work for a lot of reasons, but it is kind of this effort to exert their will over people who do not express themselves the way that they would like. And I think trans people are a gigantic part of it, but they're just one part of it.
yeah, and I think there's also a target that they feel comfortable, you know, coming at. But I think one thing that's notable about this and many of these other issues here is it's also kind of, they're asking a question to society here, like, what are you willing to accept, right? And what we're seeing, and not just in terms of bigotry, just like in terms of just infringing on people's basic rights, having the state playing an active role in education, hiring, firing decisions, literally policing what bathroom people are using, right? Like these are massive government infringements on people's lives, and seeing, you know, how far they can push the population on these kind of questions. Where, seeing basically what it is that they're able to get away with. I think it's a very worrying sign of what's to come, both on the question of like trans and queer rights in the state, but also just general democratic rights here.
For sure. I think it is and I don't think they're very quiet about it either. You know, like the same people who will talk about like, you know, trans women are predators in the bathrooms are the same people who say, you know, that they'd like to see women back in the home, right, as like their primary job. I think they're very connected, and you're absolutely right that I think it is like, yeah, what are you willing to accept and how much further? Because I think the window on trans rights specifically has been pushed so much as everything else has. And yeah, it's like you said, it's one component of that, and it's what testing the waters of what you're willing to accept.
Well, I mean, you know, in the next few months or the next few years, I mean, what are you watching really closely as to how this kind of assault plays out? What maybe are some of the immediate things that they weren't able to get recent legislative sessions that they might be pursuing in the near future? Or just in general, what should people be keeping their eye out for and keeping up with when it comes to rights here in Texas?
I think here in Texas, but also just at large, is kind of, we have seen this, you know, these efforts to crack down on trans healthcare, mostly centered around kids, right? It's about protecting kids from experimental drugs and surgeries. And most of that has been, you know, adults have been left out. There have been a few bills both in Texas and nationally to kind of like ban, you know, gender affirming care for adults that have gone nowhere, because the line that you hear from some of these people is like, well, we don't care what you do once you're 18. But they're beginning to test the waters there. And that I think is really worth watching in the next few years. Texas this session, they passed a law that basically increased the burden on health insurers that like cover gender affirming care for adults. And I don't know that there's been any real specific fallout from it yet. I think a lot of these places are working with a patchwork of competing state laws, but I think you're going to see a lot more efforts to kind of move that to the next phase if things continue to go this way. And that's really what I'm paying a lot of attention to.
Well, we'll definitely have to, keep having you on to keep everyone up to date with this. But Gwen, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your insight report.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah, happy anytime. Big fan of the show, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.